Story 1, The Island with No Residents, Extended Cinematic Version, ~2, 0 words when I booked the cottage. I told myself I needed quiet. What I didn't admit, not even to myself, was that I wanted to disappear. At 22, I felt older than I should have. Not physically, mentally, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I wasn't sleeping properly anyway. I would close my eyes and drift for an hour or two, then wake up with my thoughts racing, replaying conversations, mistakes, unfinished things. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Everything felt distant, like I was watching my own life from a step behind. So when I found the listing for a small private cabin on an island with no permanent residents, it felt less like a vacation and more like an exit. The description was simple: one dock, one path, one cabin, no signal, generator for limited power, accessible only by small boat. It sounded perfect. The boat ride out took nearly 2 hours. The further we went, the less the mainland looked real. Buildings shrank into thin gray lines. Eventually, there was nothing but water and sky. The island didn't look inviting when it came into view. It looked quiet, not empty, not abandoned, just quiet in a way that felt sealed off. There was a single wooden dock stretching from the shore like a narrow finger. Behind it, a strip of rocky beach. Beyond that, trees so dense they looked woven together. The cabin wasn't visible from the water. When the boatman helped me unload my bag, he didn't linger. He didn't ask how long I'd be staying. He didn't give any friendly warnings. He just said, "I'll be back Sunday," and pushed off. Once the engine noise faded, I felt something shift. The silence settled in layers. At first, it felt peaceful. Then it felt heavy. There's a difference between natural quiet and the absence of something that should be there. No distant engines, no birds calling overhead, no insects humming in the trees, just wind. Even that sounded muted. The path to the cabin was narrow and covered in gravel. My footsteps felt too loud. Every crunch echoed in my ears. The cabin sat in a small clearing, facing the ocean on one side and dense trees on the other. The windows were wide, but the tree line came close enough that if someone stood just a few steps back, I wouldn't see them. That thought crossed my mind immediately. I told myself it was just adjustment. The cabin smelled like old wood and salt air. The generator hummed faintly when I switched it on. The interior was simple: one bed, a small table, a couch, a bathroom with cold water. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. That first evening passed quietly. I cooked something simple, read for a while, watched the sky darken outside the windows. The ocean looked black at night, not reflective, absorbing. I fell asleep to the sound of distant waves brushing the rocks. At 1:13 a.m., I woke up, not abruptly, not from a nightmare. It felt like my body had risen to the surface of sleep on its own. For a few seconds, I didn't know why I was awake. Then I heard it, gravel shifting, a slow, deliberate crunch, pause, another step. The spacing was wrong for an animal. Too even, too controlled. Someone was walking. They didn't hurry. They made a full circle around the cabin. I tracked the sound in my head as it moved past the front wall, then along the side, then beneath the window beside my bed. I kept my breathing steady, slow, measured. The footsteps stopped outside the window. I stared at the ceiling, listening. There was no scratching, no tapping, just presence. It lasted long enough that my body began to ache from staying still. Then the footsteps continued, around the back, past the door, and faded toward the dock. I didn't move for a long time after that. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under again. In the morning, I almost convinced myself it had been a dream, until I stepped outside. The boot prints were deep and clear in the gravel, adult size, heavy tread. They circled the cabin completely, and they came from the direction of the dock. which meant someone had arrived by boat. I walked to the shoreline. The horizon was empty, flat, still. No boats, no distant engines, nothing. The dock showed no rope marks, no fresh scrapes. It was like whoever came had simply stepped onto the island and vanished. I told myself there could be another small landing spot I didn't know about. I told myself the island wasn't that big. But I didn't search the trees. I didn't want to. That second night, I locked everything earlier than necessary. Checked the windows twice. Turned off the generator earlier so there'd be less light inside. Darkness felt safer. At 12:47 a.m., I heard it again, not footsteps this time, breathing, right outside the front door, steady. Human, not exaggerated, not theatrical, just someone standing close enough that their breath reached the wood. I felt my chest tighten, then my name, soft, almost curious, like someone testing how it felt to say it. I didn't react, didn't answer, didn't move. The door handle turned gently, once, twice, slowly, not trying to break in, just checking, testing, seeing if it would give. My entire body felt cold. The breathing continued for several more seconds. Then stopped, no footsteps leaving, no retreat, just silence, a silence thicker than before. I don't remember falling asleep again. The next morning, sunlight felt artificial, too bright, too normal. I stepped outside carefully. Nothing looked disturbed, except a small stone placed directly in front of the door. Centered, intentional. Under it was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was clean, steady. I know why you came here. No signature, no explanation, no threat. That was the part that unsettled me most. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't taunting. It read like a statement of fact. I tried to rationalize. Maybe someone had seen me booking online. Maybe someone knew about my situation. Maybe it was coincidence, but I hadn't told anyone why I needed that trip. Not my coworker, not my family. No one. The reason I came wasn't dramatic. It wasn't illegal. It was personal. And the thought that a stranger believed they understood it made my skin crawl. I packed immediately. I didn't care that I had another night booked. I wanted off that island. Waiting at the dock felt longer than the entire weekend combined. The trees behind me felt closer, the air heavier. I kept expecting to hear gravel shift again. When the boat finally appeared on the horizon, I felt something close to relief. As I stepped onto the dock and waited to board, I felt it, that sensation again, being watched from the tree line. I didn't look, not at first. I told myself it was paranoia. But as the boat engine started and the dock began to drift away, something forced me to turn. Between two trees near the cabin, there was someone standing, too far to see clearly, tall, still. Watching, they didn't wave, didn't move, just stood there as the island shrank behind us. I blinked once. They were still there. When the mainland came back into view, I told myself it was over. Just an isolated incident. Just someone trespassing. But a week later, I found sand inside my apartment. Fine gray grains on my kitchen floor. I don't live near the beach. I hadn't brought any shoes inside from that trip. I vacuumed it up, told myself it was nothing. 2 nights after that, I woke up at exactly 1:13 a.m. No alarm, no noise, just awareness, and for a brief moment I thought I heard gravel shifting outside my bedroom window. But I live on the 3rd floor. There is no gravel outside my window, only concrete. I didn't check. I didn't want to. Sometimes I still think about that note. I know why you came here. The worst part isn't that someone knew my name. It's that they believed they understood me, understood what I was running from, understood what I was trying to escape. Because maybe I didn't go to that island to disappear from the world. Maybe I went because something there already knew I would. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet and the air feels too still, I wonder if the island was never empty. Maybe it just doesn't have residents. Maybe it has something else. something that doesn't live there, something that waits. And every once in a while, when someone arrives wanting to disappear, it comes down from the trees, just to see who's trying to leave the world behind, and whether they should be allowed to. Story 2, The Concrete Block, Extended Psychological Horror Version, (2, 100 words). Hashima Island doesn't feel haunted. It feels observed. There's a difference. Haunted places feel chaotic, emotional, violent with history. Hashima feels organized, deliberate, controlled. From the boat, the island rises out of the sea like a slab of broken concrete. No greenery softens it, no welcoming shoreline, just towering apartment blocks stacked tightly together, walls scarred by salt and time. It looks less like an island and more like a structure that shouldn't exist in water. The first thing I noticed when we stepped off the tour vessel was how close everything felt. The buildings are packed together so tightly that sunlight barely reaches certain corridors. Even at midday, some alleyways sit in a kind of permanent dusk. Wind moves strangely there. It doesn't flow. It funnels. It curves through broken windows and fractured stairwells, creating low tones that sound almost mechanical. Sounds bend on Hashima. They don't echo the way they should. They don't travel cleanly. They feel absorbed. Like the concrete is listening. We were part of a small supervised group, allowed to walk through designated areas. Most of the island is off limits, structurally unstable, they say. I remember thinking that structurally unstable felt like an understatement. The place feels abandoned in the same way a sealed bunker feels abandoned. Technically empty, but not surrendered. We followed our guide through narrow exterior walkways and into one of the concrete apartment blocks. The temperature shifted immediately. Outside, the air was warm and humid. Inside, it was cooler, not refreshing. Just absent of warmth. Dust coated the floors thickly, undisturbed except for our footprints. At least, that's what I thought at first. We were halfway down a dim corridor when someone ahead of me stopped. They didn't say anything. They just crouched slightly and pointed. Bare footprints in the dust, not dramatic, not cinematic, subtle, careful. They weren't deep impressions like someone had stomped through. They were light, measured, almost like whoever made them understood how to distribute their weight. The toes were clearly defined, long, narrow, no smudging, which meant they were recent. Dust that thick should have collapsed inward over time. These hadn't. They moved down the corridor, turned left, disappeared around a corner. One of the people in our group joked quietly that maybe another tour had slipped through earlier, but our guide didn't laugh. He didn't explain. He just said, "We will not go that way." That bothered me more than the footprints. Not curiosity, not concern, just refusal. We continued through another section of the building. Several apartments were open to view. Small rooms, concrete walls, rusted railings, broken glass glittering in sunlight beams. Then we entered a room that felt different. It was empty except for a single object, a water bottle, plastic, modern, not old, not discolored, clear, half full, sitting upright in the center of the floor. The dust around it was disturbed in a small radius, like it had been set down recently. I stepped closer. There was no dust on the cap, none on the surface. It was room temperature, not warm from sun, not cool from shadow, just neutral, like it had been there a few hours at most. No one in our group claimed it. Our guide looked at it for a long moment, then said we should continue. His voice sounded tight, as if something about it confirmed a thought he didn't want to speak aloud. As we left that room, I felt something I hadn't felt on the first island. Not fear, awareness, not of danger, of proximity, like we were near someone, not chasing, not stalking, just existing in parallel. Then we heard it, a cough, Soft, dry, close, it didn't echo. That's what froze me. In a concrete building, a cough should ricochet. It should stretch and bounce and distort. This one didn't. It sounded absorbed, contained, as if it came from right behind us. We turned almost in unison. The corridor was empty, but something had shifted. One of the apartment doors that had been closed earlier was now slightly open. Only a few inches, but enough. None of us had touched it. I was sure of that. I remember it because I had noticed how firmly it was wedged in its frame before. Now it breathed open slightly in the stale air. No wind strong enough to move it. The air was still. Our guide hesitated, then stepped toward it, pushed the door wider. The room inside was bare, concrete floor, concrete walls, a thin mattress in the corner, and nothing else, except something scratched into the wall beside the mattress. 4 names, etched shallowly into the concrete, 3 of them unfamiliar. The 4th was mine, spelled correctly. Not a nickname, not a shortened version, my full name, the exact spelling. I felt something inside my chest drop. I never signed in publicly under my real name for that trip. The research registration used initials. The booking confirmation used a variation. No visible roster had been posted. I hadn't spoken my full name aloud on the island. I was certain of that. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, common name, possible overlap. But the spelling, the exact spelling, including the unusual middle initial, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. No one else in the group said anything. Our guide stared at the wall longer than he should have, then quietly said, "We are leaving this building." No argument, no explanation, just direction. As we stepped back into the corridor, I had the overwhelming sensation that we had just interrupted something. Not an attack, not a trap, an observation, like we had wandered too close to someone's private space. Outside in the courtyard, sunlight felt artificial, too bright, too exposed. I turned slowly, scanning the upper levels of the surrounding buildings. That's when I saw it. 4th floor window, a silhouette, standing perfectly still, not debris, not broken railing. Human-shaped, facing outward, watching, no movement, no gesture, just presence. I pulled out my camera instinctively and took several photos. When I zoomed in on the screen, the shape was still there. Distinct shoulders, head slightly tilted. I zoomed further, the image began to distort. Digital interference, horizontal lines cutting across the frame. The silhouette stretched slightly, warped. I lowered the camera and looked up again. The window was empty. Nothing there, just darkness inside. I checked the photo again. The interference had worsened. The figure was now blurred beyond recognition. Later that evening, when I transferred the photos to my laptop, every file loaded normally, except one. The courtyard image, the file corrupted during transfer, unreadable. That's the only image from the entire trip that failed. No explanation from the memory card, no hardware error, just that file, gone. In the days after returning home, I found myself replaying details in my head. The barefoot prints, the bottle, the cough, the door, the names, and something about the footprints kept bothering me. They weren't chaotic, they weren't wandering, they followed a pattern, a rhythm, as if the person who made them had been walking slowly, repeatedly, along the same stretch. Back and forth, not escaping, not exploring, pacing, waiting. Maybe they weren't leading us somewhere. Maybe they were measuring something, or rehearsing. I started researching former residents, miners, families, accidents, evacuations, but nothing explained modern objects inside sealed buildings. Nothing explained current presence. A week after I got home, I noticed something small but precise, a fine layer of gray dust on my suitcase. I hadn't opened it since returning. The dust was similar in color to the island's concrete. I wiped it away. The next morning, it was back, thinner, but visible, as if settling from above. I lived nowhere near industrial structures, nowhere near demolition sites. I vacuumed, cleaned, closed windows. It returned twice more over the next week, then stopped, sometimes late at night. I think about that room, the mattress, the names, and I wonder something unsettling. What if the names weren't carved by someone trapped there? What if they were recorded, catalogued, visitors, observers, temporary presences? What if the building isn't abandoned? What if it's active in a way we don't recognize? Concrete absorbs sound, absorbs moisture, absorbs heat. Maybe it absorbs something else too. Footsteps, voices, names, and maybe when enough is collected, it begins to learn patterns. The silhouette in the fourth floor window didn't wave, didn't signal, didn't hide. It stood there like someone watching an experiment conclude, calm, patient. Unsurprised, Hashima doesn't feel haunted. It feels aware, like it knows when someone enters, knows how long they stay, knows what they look like from above, and maybe, just maybe, those barefoot prints weren't left by someone trying to stay hidden. Maybe they were left deliberately subtle, just visible enough, so we would notice, so we would understand, that we were never alone inside that concrete block. And maybe the reason sounds don't echo properly there is because something is always standing close enough to hear you clearly, without needing the walls to repeat it. Story 3. The Hospital Island Extended Psychological Horror Version. Tilde 2, 100 words. We shouldn't have gone to North Brother Island. North Brother Island, we knew that. It isn't a tourist destination. It isn't open to the public. It sits quietly in the East River, visible but unreachable, a sliver of overgrowth and collapsing brick between the Bronx and Rikers Island. Abandoned hospital buildings, quarantine wards, decades of rot. Every article about it says the same thing: restricted access, dangerous structures, protected wildlife. But curiosity has a way of making warnings feel exaggerated. There were 4 of us that afternoon, 2 kayaks, calm water, clear sky, the city humming in the distance like background static. From the river, the island doesn't look terrifying. It looks forgotten. Trees swallow most of the structures. Ivy drapes over brick walls. Windows sit hollow and dark, but from a distance they almost look like shadows instead of openings. We told ourselves we weren't really going onto the island, just landing briefly, stretching our legs, looking around the shoreline. That was the lie we agreed on. The moment our kayaks scraped against the rocks, the air changed. It felt heavier near the tree line, cooler, not in temperature, in tone. The city noise dulled slightly once we stepped onto land. Not gone, just muted, like someone had turned the volume down 1 notch. The hospital building closest to shore leaned slightly inward, as if exhausted. Its windows were broken or boarded, vines threaded through cracks in the masonry. Mark was the first to suggest we step inside. He said it casually, like it was obvious. Just the first floor. He added, no one argued. Inside, the smell hit first. Old wood, mold, something metallic underneath it. Not strong, just present. The hallway stretched long and straight, lined with doorways. The ceiling sagged in places. Paint peeled from the walls in thin curling strips. And yet, it didn't feel chaotic. It felt still. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from emptiness, but from waiting. We moved carefully. Floorboards creaked under our weight. Light filtered through broken windows in thin pale beams. At first, there was nothing but our own noise. Then we heard it, a voice, soft, not shouting, not panicked, calm, almost welcoming. Mark. It echoed slightly, but not enough to distort it. It sounded controlled, measured, like someone speaking at conversational distance. We froze. Mark looked at us immediately. No one had said his name. The voice came again, closer this time, still calm, still precise. Mark. The way it pronounced his name made something tighten in my chest. No hesitation, no mispronunciation. It sounded practiced, not guessed. Mark swallowed, and for a second, I thought he was going to answer. Instead, he whispered, "That's not funny." None of us laughed. We hadn't planned a prank. The building was too quiet for that. Then the voice shifted slightly in tone, not louder, just more familiar. "Mark, come here." That's when we ran. Not screamed, not shouted, just turned and ran, down the hallway, around a corner, toward the broken doorway we had entered through. Behind us, there were no chasing footsteps, no slamming doors, just one more sound, a low exhale, almost like a sigh. When we burst back into daylight, the brightness felt wrong, too sudden, too exposed. We didn't slow down until we reached the kayaks. Hands shaking, we shoved them into the water. As we pushed off, I heard one last thing from behind us. Laughter low, not loud enough to echo across the river. Just enough to carry, not hysterical, not manic. Soft, amused, halfway across, the rhythm of paddling steadied slightly. That's when I noticed Mark had gone pale. Not just shaken, drained. He kept glancing over his shoulder. "What did you hear?" I asked him. He didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "When it first said my name, it didn't sound like a stranger." None of us responded. The water slapped gently against the kayaks. He swallowed. It sounded like my dad. That sentence hung there between us. His father had passed away 3 years earlier. None of us had known that. He hadn't told us. We were already halfway across the river when he said it. I didn't ask him why he hadn't mentioned it sooner. I think we were all afraid to confirm what we thought we heard. Because if it sounded like someone he knew, what did it sound like to the rest of us? When I looked back toward the island, I saw the figure standing at the shoreline. At first, I thought it was just a trick of light through trees, but it was too centered, too distinct. A human shape, tall, still, watching. I couldn't make out details. No facial features, no clothing texture. Just silhouette, but I noticed something subtle. It wasn't facing the river randomly. It was facing directly at us, tracking even as we moved. Its head adjusted slightly, not dramatically, just enough to follow our position in the water. And then I had the strangest thought. It didn't want us to stay. It wanted us to leave. The realization unsettled me more than the voice. Because something that wants you to leave isn't protecting you. It's protecting something else. We reached the opposite shore without incident. No more voices, no splashes in the water, no pursuit. The city noise returned fully as our kayaks scraped onto pavement. Cars passing, sirens in the distance, life continuing. It felt almost insulting that something like that could sit in the river unnoticed. That night, none of us slept well. Mark texted around 2 a.m. Did anyone else hear it differently? No one replied immediately. The next morning, he called me. He sounded tired. He told me something he hadn't said before. When the voice first called his name, it didn't just sound like his father. It used a nickname only his father used, a childhood name, one he hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. He said the second time the voice called him, the tone changed slightly, less father, more neutral, like it was adjusting, testing. I didn't know what to say, because I had heard something too. The first time it called his name, it sounded normal to me. But the second time, for a split second, it sounded like my own voice, not identical, but close enough that it made my stomach drop. I didn't tell him that. Days passed, then a week. I tried not to think about it, tried to convince myself it was acoustics. Wind bending through broken corridors, sound distortion, group panic, until I received a voicemail. Unknown number, no caller ID. The message was 12 seconds long. The first 5 seconds were silence. Then breathing, soft, controlled. Then my name, spoken calmly, perfectly, no distortion, no echo, the exact way I pronounce it. I deleted the voicemail, blocked the number, told no one. A few days later, Mark stopped answering messages. At first, we assumed he needed space. Then his social media accounts disappeared. Not deactivated, gone. Phone disconnected. No forwarding contact. It wasn't dramatic. No announcement. No explanation. Just absence. I went back through the photos from that day. Most were blurred from movement, but one image, taken accidentally while running toward the shoreline, captured the hospital entrance behind us. In the doorway, partially obscured by shadow, there was a shape, too tall for the frame, head slightly tilted. Watching, when I zoomed in, the pixels warped, not corrupted, just unsettled, like the image didn't want to sharpen. I stared at it for a long time, and then something clicked in my mind. The voice hadn't sounded aggressive. It hadn't threatened. It hadn't chased. It invited. It adjusted tone. It used familiarity. It tested responses. And when we ran, it laughed, not because we escaped, but because it learned something. Maybe that's what the island is. Not haunted, not possessed, studious. It studies the people who step inside, finds a voice that fits, a tone that pulls, a name that lands correctly. And when it succeeds, maybe they don't run. Maybe they answer. Maybe they walk deeper into the hallway, toward the sound, toward the room where the light doesn't quite reach. Sometimes I wonder if the figure at the shoreline wasn't disappointed. Maybe it was satisfied, because it doesn't need everyone. It just needs one person to stay, and maybe, just maybe, it didn't want us to remain on the island because we weren't the right ones. It wanted someone else, someone more receptive, someone willing to answer when called. I still kayak sometimes, but never near that stretch of river. And sometimes, when the city noise dips late at night, when traffic fades and wind slips between buildings, I hear something soft beneath it. Not loud enough to echo, just enough to carry, laughter, low, patient, like something across the water is still practicing voices, waiting for the next group of curious people to ignore the warnings. And when it says your name, it won't shout. It will sound like someone you trust, and that's when you'll know you shouldn't have gone there either.